record. And is anybody willing to take notes today?
I can do it.
Thank you, Anthony.
Hey.
There you go. So I guess let's do status updates. I can kick it off. I don't have much to report. I mean, everybody else has been doing the coding. Oh, I did put up a PR to run the pack acceptance tests in our GitHub Actions, which for anyone who ever had to scramble to find a Windows environment so that you could run pack acceptance, when we're trying to release, I think is a welcome addition. But other than that, I don't have much to add.
Well, I can add that I think working on the registry validation PR, but then I wait for the merging these platforms 07 PR first that was merged, and then I was, changing whatever part was affected. And then there is this another conversation opened that can affect the way I'm doing the validation. So I was checking that to see, what's going on there. But I think I will keep this PR there, just waiting for some other clarifications on some other parts, right? Before merging something that, we will be rolling back and back and forth. I think so. It's better just for me to keep an eye on what's going on, try to wait for everything is clear, and then I will do the modifications that are needed. Okay. So yeah, that's from my side.
So I'm working on an issue to make the CMB assets environment variable show up conditionally, right? If asset packages are supported, both in the build pack and the platform. Turned out to be a little bit more acrobatics than first thought, but it's all right. I think I put the bulk of it up still in draft mode. I just want to go back on to make sure I got all the tests right, all the test coverage.
I haven't done really anything on lifecycle in the last week, and I'm going to be mostly out for the next week, so I might show up to some of these meetings sporadically as I move. But I'm going to be out for at least a couple weeks. But I'll continue to look at the PRs that come through and try to take a look at that stuff at least to keep it moving along.
Good luck again, Jesse. Hi, Emily. So I was, I think, mostly out since the last time we talked. We met, I'm sorry. Since I was back, I mostly reviewed some PRs and RFCs, so I don't have a lot to share. I started looking at one of the lifecycle bugs this morning. So I still don't have an update on this.
You talking? Because we can't hear you.
Well, I was just saying everyone has spoken except Emily. I don't know if you have anything to add.
Sorry for showing up late. I don't have a lot to add here. Other than sort of a discussion that came up a bit in one of the working groups around sort of caching strategies and how that intersects with asset packages. that gave me some doubts, like if we wanted to make a big change to that soon, do we want to be shipping asset packages right now before we revisit it? Opening up that conversation feels a little bit bad because we've just done this with stack packs, but I do think we probably should have that conversation maybe tomorrow at working group before we ship the life cycle, and maybe a little bit here. I'm just curious to get this smaller group's take on that.
Absolutely. I think the concepts are just, at least to me, they're very similar. And the use cases, it's very blurry. I think it'd be nice to just from a design perspective to understand like holistically what the different use cases like tailor to best, and like at least so the documentation at least will like be clear.
Yeah, I think asset packages solve a problem, maybe in a slightly overly complex way now that we're going back in time and thinking about how much complexity we introduce to things, but they definitely solve a problem. They don't solve the only problem. And I'm a little bit worried about the scattershot approach. Like maybe we need a holistic vision for caching that we feel good about before we ship any one component of it, because we might then very quickly end up changing that one component if it doesn't actually fit into the holistic vision.
Practically, I don't think anybody's asked for caching, or for asset packages besides us to some extent, Picado folks.
Yeah. But they do have a solution for that that works for them most of the time in a way that's transparent to end users. Just like a little bit ugly. It'd be nice to have a standard in the project, right? But it's not practically a burning issue. Nothing's on fire when we don't have it, unlike some other problems which are more actively bothering our end users.
Should we put that on the agenda to discuss in more detail?
Yeah, I think let me do that.
I'll just add it to the.
Thanks, Natalie.
Anything else to say on updates? Otherwise, we can jump into release planning. I could share my screen just to show the milestone. Get this number 2. Okay, you can see that. All right. Oh no, I think both of my headphones, or one of them, is dying, but all right, we'll just proceed. Can someone say something?
Hello.
We can hear.
Oh, okay. It's one ear. I'm gonna charge this one. Like it wasn't organized. Maybe. Okay, so let's look at the milestone. So there are 4 issues. This one at the top is the chore that I mentioned in my status update. This should be, pending. I can assign myself, but this should be pending PR review. Hopefully we can get that merged in. And this one from Juan, I think maybe deserves a bit of discussion because as Juan, as you mentioned in your update, there is an open question on the spec about what should the platform API really look like? Where did I put it? Oh, it's on the PR itself. Maybe I can pull up that spec conversation and we might be able to resolve it here.
At the end, yeah, there.
I guess the question is, oh no. I'm on the other headphone is gone now, but is there an echo?
Seems good.
Okay, all right. Let me know if I can run and get some numbers. But I guess the question is, we backed out the changes to analyze TOML. There was a bunch of like schema changes that were no longer necessary if we're not validating mixins. But I guess the question is, now that we're validating read access to the run image, does it make sense to pass that along to the exporter so that we ensure the exact same run image is used during export? And then there's been a little bit of conversation about that. I don't know if anyone wants to speak to either of these options. I sort of put forward a third option of just, can we just proceed? What's so bad about, we're just providing a convenience to the user and failing fast if they can't actually read the run image. But I don't know. Are there any strong opinions here?
It's not a terribly strong opinion. I think for most of these images in the past, the first time we read them, we locked them to a digest so that the thing you're talking about doesn't change between phases. So if you're like re-looking at the tag or using a different input, sort of what's the run image in one phase might not actually be the run image in a later phase. Just for checking read access, it really doesn't matter that much. You're trying to help people out, but it won't matter so much if you fail later. It's like, well, that's a weird thing you did. I do have a tiny worry that if we don't lock it down, it is an opportunity for bugs to come in later based on race conditions. It's like if we, in the future, without thinking about it, like, oh, we're just assuming that run image is correct, but really we're resolving it twice and it could have changed or be set with a different input. That seems like an opportunity in the architecture for us to introduce issues eventually. That's my one worry, but it's not like a burning worry that I think we need to like hold the presses for. If there is any discussion that like maybe we want to be dynamically selecting run images, maybe analyze isn't the place to be doing this anyways, because we aren't 100% sure that that's the run image in theory in the future.
Yeah, I don't have a strong opinion either. I do like the idea of fetching the digest early so that we are talking about the same image throughout the process. I think it could simplify some of the code that has to go out and check some of these things later on. Like we should be able to, make sure that we're not an image is suddenly deleted, or well, I guess maybe. But
are we validating? Sorry. Are we validating this like metadata, like the stack ID and stuff? Eventually, I think we'll probably be validating the OS packages. If we are doing that or plan to do that during the analyze phase before the build kicks off and resolve a digest to something, then it's like, I think it makes sense to pass the information forward because we've said this is the one that's not just accessible, but it's also, we failed fast because we checked the metadata on this particular revision of it. And that feels like a stronger argument for passing the digest forward than not doing that. But if it's really just read access, like I don't even know if, I guess it's like kind of convenient to fail fast if you can't read a tag, but it's barely an input almost.
I feel like it's more convenient than you might imagine because people sometimes wait for really long builds that fail during the export phase because they're fiddling with some permission in the Kate secret, and it's like a huge pain.
Testing access is so like a big, like it's always everyone's hurdle as soon as they go from pack to a cluster is like figuring out how to get the credentials in the way that makes sense for everything.
If it's just validating that you can access it though, maybe that's something that we should push into the platform, because I could see a platform like KPAC, that validation may be extraneous because they pre-validate their images in a different controller, or like it feels like it's having the lifecycle take a strong opinion about maybe something that's a little bit outside of its domain. But
I
if
would disagree, because the lifecycle has to eventually read this image to succeed. So being able to read it isn't really outside of its domain, and there could be some nuances in the way credentials are passed from the platform to the lifecycle, or the way we're consuming the credentials that still cause it to break, even if the platform gives it the thumbs up. There's a bunch of like weird edge cases with like, is there a trailing slash on your registry and your Docker file, stuff like that. I guess my opinion here is that like, even in the case where we're dynamically selecting the run image, theoretically in the future, I think we're still going to have to, in analyze, sort of collect the information about the run image candidates in a file, because detector's never going to reach out to a registry. So it is, I have a slight preference for locking down the digest. If we wanted to punt it on this release, I don't think it's a big deal, but I think eventually we should lock down the digest.
I think if we do those validations in the future, we probably want to do them early anyways. So for the same reason, like you don't want, if you picked a bad run image, you don't want it to fail during export. And so I think that works well with locking down the digest. Future looking, maybe other validations could happen there. And so it works out architecturally towards the same thing.
If we want to ship this version without locking the digest, though, I think that's reasonable. I think once we lock the digest, we'll want to take the run image flag out of exporter. So if we wanted to sort of bundle more breaking changes in a single API, that would be the case for doing it now.
Well, just personally, I mean, I think if we're going to validate access, we should validate it all in one phase, right? It was a little bit hesitant to let go of that validation of a run image and analyze, because it just makes sense that conceptually you just remember that all of that stuff is checked in Analyzer. So that's why it's kind of pushing for keeping things as they are. But at the same time, like, I don't think like all we're shipping, right, with this life cycle, at the end of the day, is this reversal of the phase ordering plus maybe asset packages. It's like a very small feature set. And so if we are comfortable delaying that to make it more, I guess, complete, or what we want it to be, then that seems worthy to me.
I guess I feel like the run image validation, I agree with you, should happen during Analyzer. I feel like even in a world where there are multiple candidate run images, we might want to check that they're readable during Analyzer anyways, right? And then eventually lock down their metadata once at the beginning, and we can trust it all along. And if platforms have to do a lot of work to accommodate this new API, changing the phases, I incline slightly towards moving in another breaking change. Like, I think exporter is too late to receive a run image. So maybe we should remove the flag from exporter or record the digest during Analyzer. And that at least gives us what is close to what we want in the end, and the files that we would need to break to iterate from there aren't actually user facing. that convincing at all?
I think so. I mean, it's like on the one hand, I'm like cringing inside because because we haven't shipped the life cycle for a while. And I know that it sounds simple to change that schema, but I have that draft PR that like does approximately that, and it was a big change. But personally, I think this seems like the right way to do it. If we're going to invest the effort, let's just do it.
I feel like maybe part of the reason last time we were trying to change the schema, it was worse, is because we were trying to rename image to previous image. Like if we just added like purely additive addition of run image, does that remove some of the complexity?
I think so. Yeah. It sounds like we are, at least two of us are in agreement. I don't know if anyone has opposing opinions they want to air. Okay, so that, at least one that makes your PR in a little bit better state, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
So I guess we'll need to create a new issue to capture this other stuff, which I can do, and add it to the milestone. So I think we've unblocked at least or resolved some of the uncertainty around this issue. We have asset packages on our agenda for this one, and this is a small addition to our markdown to describe some of the processes. So that is O12. I had added we could talk about it at any time, but to kind of be more forward thinking about what the next milestone should look like. Maybe we could just circle back to that, because that could kind of branch out into other kind of conversations. So I guess with that, we do have our standing needs discussion. I don't think anything has changed from the last time. So I'm gonna go back. And the other one is RFCs. Does anyone want to speak to any of these open ones? I think Stevens remove stacks is showing up here, but that's another one that we should all be looking at. They're all open as tabs here.
Should we label those with the implementation? I think they got labeled with core, Stephen, which is something we usually only do for like governance stuff, even though most big spec changes, they touch implementation and core. I might relabel them because I think it'd be easier to see them in this.
Yep, go for it. I broke it down into 3 parts and forgot what we said before. Doesn't matter to me.
I do have one, I guess, just sort of meta comment about some of these RFCs. Like, maybe this is just, me, but it kind of feels like there's so many sort of larger changes being proposed right now, and they're all kind of moving at their own pace, but it's not clear to me, how to bring them to the finish line, right? Like I don't know, like I read it, I'll make comments where I think, it's relevant, but then at the same time, I don't know what's left, right?
I think for the ones I've opened, I'm planning to respond to all the feedback. So there's like Charles from Red Hat just asked for some more examples. There's just a bunch of comments in there that are like, hey, can you clarify this part? So my plan is to respond to all the feedback and then keep answering questions until nobody says anything for a week and all the feedback's been responded to, and then I'll request to be moved to FCP to get approved. So like, at least for the ones I'm sitting on, they're just not ready to, I need to do more work to push them forward.
Definitely need to do more work on my own as well, given that it's still a draft. I do wonder though, Stephen, given that we're both, the cycle times for both of us iterating on some of these things can be long. Like if someone here wanted to take one of Stephen's 3 RFCs and be responsible for making some changes to it, with us syncing up. I don't want to speak for you, Stephen, but I imagine you might appreciate that.
Yeah, if anybody feels like any of the ones I'm working on with Aster, please feel free to make suggestions to them, take the PR over completely, push commits to the branch. I put the branch on the project so you can push to it directly if you have access to the life cycle if you want to. That's any of those things is fine. I have no attachment to them. I just want to push things forward, and I'm bandwidth limited. Assume, Emily, you feel similar.
Same with the caching one.
I don't feel quite ready to raise my hand and adopt a specific RFC, but I do pledge to do more, I guess, suggestions in addition to comments.
If you use the suggest feature on GitHub and you copy and paste your signed off by, like in the second, in the larger box, you can just literally type sign -off -by and then your name, just like it would if you do commit -s. And that way you don't have to clone and then make changes locally and then push to a branch or whatever. You can do everything in the web interface and it still approves the DCO bot. That's made things a lot easier for me when I'm suggesting changes on RFCs.
I guess if we want to move on, the next, I think let's move asset packages forward, because this is kind of more forward thinking than that. I'm gonna just here. Yeah, let's talk about what we want to do.
My straw dog proposal here is that we move the asset packages PRs on the life cycle and pack into draft. Pull it from the spec and wait. Work together on a cohesive cache story.
Just to kind of sanity check where we're at with asset package support, I want to say that it's like 3/4 implemented in the life cycle. It's already been merged. And in pack, I'm not sure, but
there's a big open PR last I checked, but it did not merge.
It's been open, and from Dan's perspective, it was pretty much done. I think there was some final comments about specs, about some tests, but they're sort of not going to move anymore, at least from the original contributor. So that's where it's at.
We've not merged the spec yet for this either. So we might have to back some changes out of the life cycle.
I mean, regardless, right? I just want to say, as a witness to it, it seemed like there were huge blockers to that thing getting in anyway, just from review perspective, just from the specs and other things, right? Like it was just sort of always in that state where it was from platform perspective, ready to go, like ready to go in.
Do you have a question? Like, I mean, it seems like we're trying to find the right balance between like getting it perfect, right? And, you know, doing wasted work, right? And like we did talk in the past about having experimental or experimental type stuff. Like if most of the work is already done, is there harm in just throwing it behind an experimental flag and letting people tell us if it's helpful to them? And then we can, I mean, I don't know. Would that give us additional information beyond what we're able to do just in our design process?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting idea. I guess I have to think a little bit about, I was planning on giving you to flesh out more, right? In terms of like, is it a flag in pack and then also in the life cycle? Mostly just because we don't have any experimental features in the life cycle yet. So the questions I'm asking myself now are, do we just leave it out of the spec? It's like an experimental feature that references the RFC. Can a build pack using any API version declare assets, or does the experimental feature ship with an API version? Is it like an API 06 experimental feature? I feel like some of these, I think what is always, I really like the idea of experimental features. Whenever I go to say we should do one, where I always get hung up is in the like combinatorial, we already sort of about combinatorial spec problem. And then I don't know exactly how experimental features fits in that when it cuts across, when it's something that would be in the API, right? If it wasn't experimental.
We also have the concept of an experimental API itself, or I look at here, there was a okay. Here, there's experimental features and pre-release APIs, which pre-release gives the impression that it will eventually be released, whereas experimental does not.
Yeah, I think pre-release APIs was supposed to be around like, we think we've implemented API 06. Try it out. And, or like maybe we haven't implemented it all the way. This is like a version of this that is incomplete or unvalidated. Feel free to try it, but we don't guarantee its support with the same level. Experimental features. We discussed how we would flag them on and off in the life cycle. No, this is for the, sorry, I'm like rereading this.
All right, I definitely like to talk to a maintainer about this, but from the platform perspective, from me, my perspective, I kind of don't want this in, to be honest. It's a non-trivial amount of code to maintain, right? And again, I haven't heard like a lot at stake here. I think it's going to cause more harm than good to just plop it in.
That's my fear as well, given the moving parts around actually the asset package images themselves. If it was a simpler feature, like there's just extra layers in a build pack or a builder, rather than this whole new artifact concept, I would feel a little bit better about it in terms of the complexity we'd be pulling in for an experimental feature. I wonder if we can pare down a subset of this that could be experimental, might be a path forward if we didn't want to wait on grand unified caching solution. But I take Anthony's point.
I don't want to, I mean, I think the life cycle is a little bit easier, right? Because the interface is so simple, right? Just passing this environment variable through or not. And we didn't talk about what, a holding it would look like. I would be an advocate for not ripping out all of the code, but simply saying that for platform API 07 supports asset packages is always false, right? And same for Buildpack API, so that in the future, if we have all of the code to flip this on, we can just flip it on when we're ready. That would be my proposal. We can hash it out on the platform side what we want it to look like.
That seems very reasonable to me. Because I think there's going to be some sort of rendered assets eventually, right? There's a good chance that we end up flipping that back on, even if we've changed stuff about the packaging interface or exactly when they're there. A lot of the things that are contentious about that RFC don't actually touch the lifecycle part, which is just telling Buildpacks where the assets are.
That makes sense.
Is that an action item for me to, figure out what the hell's going on with asset packages on the platform side?
Yeah, can you ice the asset packages on the platform side if possible? If you need help there, one of us can help you. I think this is also 100% a conversation we need to have again with the broader working group, because this has already gone through the RFC process. And I'm sorry to make you all do it twice. I just sort of wanted to do it first in this smaller group. I
don't think any of our work will be wasted. It'll sit there, unused code. Eventually, we'll make use of it.
Some cost fallacy, right? I think it applies here.
No, but now we have the ability to construct the environment depending on the API for the platform and the build pack. That's something we'll eventually need to do. So, the platform interface, I feel good about it all.
Great. I feel bad. The subteams had to deal with a lot of churn due to waffling in the decision making. But I think it's going to be worth it in the end, because our choices, I think, are deal with the churn now or deal with another large set of breaking changes potentially, which is annoying for the life cycle in its own way, because you have to maintain all the permutations of the API, right?
Is there anything more to say about asset packages for the life cycle? If not, I did put these two as discussion topics. I know I put them in this order, but I propose we look at the spec first, just because the spec is something that we need before we can ship. And given that we talked about things that will require changes to the spec, probably it makes sense for, people on this team to help make the changes to the spec so that they reflect the reality that we've said is desired. I do have this open spec PR, which we talked about earlier, and this one is owned by Sam. However, there are these three. I think one is a PR to address the issue, which I think this will need to be updated. Actually, sorry, this is platform, but anyway, since we talked about it,
those are the two we can probably pull out of this API, right? After we talk with the rest of the core team.
yeah. So I guess it's just relaxed mixing contract, which I thought had its own PR. Anyway, I should have prefaced this whole thing. I think we talked about in the past that, the core team is very busy, and so we should try to, as we can, contribute to the spec changes that we want to see reflected. So that was my purpose in going through these. I don't know if that's valuable.
Actually, looks like there's a PR linked here that was merged, but it wasn't formally linked. So maybe this one is actually done. If we could go take a look at it, let's see what's actually in that PR.
This was PR'd into the build pack.
That makes sense.
And so I think there was, I
think we probably need to make changes to both specs, and we've only done it for one of them.
okay.
Is that I can look at this after this meeting. You can help on the details of this one, because I probably knew what was going on here at one point in time. I've forgotten right now, but
I think I remember actually Dan included in his original PR, it was a PR to both the platform and the build pack files. And then we said, we'll never change both files in a single PR. And I remember that the change to the platform, 221 for platform changes, which has already been merged. So there we go. I remember these changes were not strictly required. They were just kind of clarifying that prefixless mix-ins affect both images. This was even just like a nice to have. I'll make a comment. Nope.
so we can just close that, I think.
There. Try this. Anyway, that is a platform. So that should be, I guess, someone with the powers will remove asset packages from platform 07. And then build pack 07, I guess is the one which will need some help pulling out asset packages. And then this is the one that I was thinking of, because I guess there was some confusion around how build pack and how the environment variables are set by the launcher, and there was sort of a I had made a PR to try to help, but it was very minimal, and I think we had said that there's some additional reorganization that would be helpful. I guess, does anyone have a desire to work on this? Is what I'm getting to. Should this be a requirement to ship the next build pack API?
I think if it's not done and we want to ship, we can kick it out. It is not a requirement. If anyone wants to do it, because you want to try your hand at spec writing, have at it, but I don't think it needs to be a requirement.
That's good to know.
I would volunteer to do it myself, but I know what my schedule looks like and that I will just disappoint you all by not doing it in a reasonable time frame. So I'm not going to try to promise to do it.
Same right now. I'll commit if it's still here for the next version cut though. But my timelines are a little wild right now.
Well, that's kindness in its own way, so don't feel bad about it.
I guess with that, and then 9 minutes left to go, there was this question of open issues for the next life cycle, which actually there are 61 open issues on the life cycle, and like a fair amount of them relate to stat packs, so I've omitted those. But also a fair amount of them are chores, which actually might be valuable to look at as well. But I don't know if like just going through all the issues is going to be helpful here. So I guess, you know, kind of my question at least is, does anyone have a sense of what we should focus on once we get through this period of reversing the phases and, you know, fast validation of registry access, all that stuff? Like, there are a number of different directions we could take this. So one of the things we talked about is like that's why I have all the chores here, like the various improvements that we want to make to the code to make it easier to change in the future. Should we invest in that now? And if not, you know, what other things should we focus on?
I'm not as doing as much of the day-to-day work here, so I don't feel like my opinion should count a ton. But I know that when I was doing more of the day-to-day work, a lot of the chores on this list were things we talked about how nice it would be if we had them, dreamed of doing them someday. So if we have a weird gap in the features that we can deliver, might be nice to improve the test coverage and stuff like that. So releasing isn't as wild as it has been in the past.
Maybe this is a good time to ask a question, but I'm wondering if we should start cutting releases and leaving them like I don't know whether a life cycle should support like all versions forever. Like it feels like we should maybe try to restrict that down to, you know, the latest version supports the latest life cycle, and we can go back and patch for security vulnerabilities of the older ones. Like I'm just wondering if it's just getting so complicated because we have so many different spec versions and build pack versions that collide all the time. Like I wonder if the matrix should be supported by binaries, not a single binary.
I think there's two things in there. It's like, how could we support multiples at the same time better? In my mind, that comes down to a refactoring problem, because I think it needs to be safe for the platform to upgrade the life cycle. And a given build can contain build packs with multiple API versions. So like maybe we could have one per platform, but I think they all need to do multiple build packs in order for a build to work sanely.
Yeah, I think that's kind of what I had in mind. It's like one per platform, and then like maybe each platform only supports the, you know, a minimum build pack version as well, just to kind of move things along. But if it made it easier to support all build packs across all platforms, that I think I'm fine with that too. But just reducing another matrix of platform and build pack.
Sorry, like one lifecycle binary per platform? Is that
per platform API? I think that introduces its own problems in that, when you add a new Buildpack API, now you're going to cut like 6 releases of your 6 different versions of the life cycle, which doesn't feel as like its own problem, right?
Yeah, do they have to always support? Shouldn't you have to upgrade to the latest lifecycle to get the V next of the Buildpack version? Like I'm okay supporting all previous Buildpack versions, but I don't feel like we should have to cut like a lifecycle 09 to get Buildpack 07. Like I feel like that probably doesn't need to happen. Like if you need that ability.
I think the problem is there's always going to be old platforms. There's always going to be old platforms using old platform APIs. And if the life cycle doesn't allow an old platform to run a new build pack, then we're in trouble, because now every build pack author needs to maintain multiple versions of every build pack if they want their build packs to run on older platforms. So that sort of just pushes the problem out to every build pack. I feel like one life cycle is an easier problem to deal with than 200 build packs.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense.
But I think there's another question here, which is, can we start dropping older APIs? I think we should do that. I think the first ones to go, like the old 2 APIs, might not reduce our complexity a lot, but we should get people used to the idea that someday we will drop older APIs and get a handle on what our deprecation window is. And then eventually we should be able to drop some of the annoying ones.
I guess if we can't do the multiple binaries, if it doesn't make sense to do that from a project standpoint, then maybe just from a code organization standpoint, like, we talked about it before, duplicating the code so that when a contributor comes to develop a small feature for 07, they don't have to think about 06, 05, 04, 03 and like figure out how to match all the acceptance tests and unit tests for every previous version. I just think the mental capacity of a life cycle is just too much for someone to come in and do a small feature. There's too much to think about.
I want to make the case that maybe we're giving up too soon, right? Like asset packages we thought it would be trivial to implement and it was like horrible, right? But at the same time, we did so much work in that PR that we can use for future features, right? And so I kind of want to just give it like one more go at, make these interfaces what we want them to be and see if that helps before we throw our hands up and start, duplicating stuff, because that will create its own problems too.
It does. I think whatever we do with stack packs will be the real test of how hard that is. Like how comfortable would we feel an 05 platform working with all the changes we made to support, whatever the V next of stack packs is. I've got to bounce for another meeting, but I'd love to continue this discussion. So talk to you later.
With that, thanks everybody.
Have a good one.
Hi.